In this video, you'll learn how to be an awesome Hangout on Air host. Presented by Lori and Cher, the Hangout Darlings. Hey, it's Lori and Cher from the Lori and Cher Show, Hacking Into Awesome. Cher and I wanted to come on and do a quick video with some easy tips on how to be an absolutely awesome host. So Cher, let's jump right into things. The first one is research your guest.
Yes, you have to know everything about your guest, including their title, why you even brought them to the show, their expertise, so that you can have a decent conversation. As well, it does happen that you may even lose your guest, and you may have to ad-lib about your guest until your guest gets back in onto the show. So definitely take the time, research, and you'll have an awesome hangout. And let's move right into the next tip, Lori, which is enter the hangout early.
Now, this is a big one. If you're a host, you need to understand how Hangouts work. And let me tell you, when Cher and I first started, we were looking at different places, trying to use different resources online to kind of really understand it. And one of the biggest lessons we learned is you need to be on the Hangout early. Now, Cher happens to be our master control operator / director for the Lori and Cher Show. And one of the things that is her responsibility is entering in the Hangout first. She makes sure that everything looks good and that most importantly it has the start broadcast button on her screen. You don't want anyone else to have that start broadcast button on their screen because then they're kind of controlling the broadcast. The other thing that you want to make sure is once you've gone into the Hangout, and we call it the green room, you want to make sure that you share the right link, the link to all the guests that you've invited to be on the show. That is an exclusive link for, your guest. It's not a link that you would be sharing publicly. The broadcast link for all your audience to watch, that's a completely different one that, you can make sure that you share out. But you have to know the difference between the broadcast link and then the link for your guest to get into the green room and make sure, and I know Cher knows this for sure, you have the start broadcast button on your screen.
For sure.
Yes. Let's jump into tip number 3, which is a big one. Prep your guest.
You know what? Whether it's your first hangout for your guest or it's their 50th hangout, you need to prep them both technically and as well as how the show's going to go. So some of the things that you need to make sure is, Lori mentioned the link. You need to make sure that they have that link ready to go. If they drop out of the broadcast, it makes it very easy for them to get back in. As well, you need to show them about the mute settings and the camera settings. So if they do have a noisy background, all of a sudden, some unexpected noise, they can mute themselves and allow that to continue. As well, you may have to help them turn on their lower third. As you can see, we have our lower thirds on, and trust me, we have to walk through this each time with our guests. And this is, I guess, my favorite part because that's definitely not Lori's favorite part. But I do walk through our guests and how they can turn on their lower third, especially if it's their first time on a Hangout. And in our previous video, we talked about knowing where to look. You actually have to tell your guests where to look to make sure that they're looking at the camera. You may even have to say, lock your chair, don't move, look at the camera, not at the screen. And you have to give them these instructions because you want to make sure that you have the best quality broadcast possible. As well, you want to make sure that they know the order of the show, which brings us to our next point, which is what Lori's going to get into, which is using a rundown.
Absolutely. Now, my background is in television. I used to be a television producer, and one of the things that we had to use was a rundown. You want to know what happens at the beginning, what happens in the middle, and what happens at the end. So before every broadcast that Cher and I have for Hacking Into Awesome, I usually prepare a rundown. And it is basically everything that will happen with our show. It's kind of like our show's Bible. And really what it does, it has all all the elements. So it has the intros, it talks about, the boards that we use for our broadcast, and it really is a guide for us to be on the same page. Cher and I use Google Docs, which is one of the great hacks that we use for our show, and it allows us to be on the same page. It has our questions for our guests, and it's everything that we need to know about our show. So I think it's very, very important that you actually follow your rundown so that your show has that beginning, middle, and end, and that it's not just a random show and you just coming on and talking. It's about prepping yourself so that you know that everything that you want to include on your Hangout on Air is included in your actual show. So let's move on to tip number 5, which is moderate discussion. Right, Cher?
Oh, absolutely. Remember, you guys are in the ultimate control of your show. So that means making sure that you get through the rundown that we just talked about. And if you have a guest that's kind of having the show veer off into a total different direction that you don't want it to go in, it's your job to steer them back in by moderating that discussion. As well, you may have, especially when you have a multi-panel guest, you may have a guest that kind of sits back and watches the show happen, as opposed to remembering that they're there actually to share their opinion. So you may have to actively encourage people to join in on the conversation. And as well, finally, it's your job to keep everybody welcome and feel like they're a part of this. So you want to keep that conversation moving and keep that rundown tight so you know exactly where you're leading the show, because it's your job to do that. And that also leads us into our next point, which is making sure that you have fun.
Yes. You want to make sure that your show is entertaining. Let me tell you, the Hangout on Air space, the Google Hangout on Air space, is relatively new. I mean, a lot of people have not adopted it, but there are a ton of Hangouts that happen on a day-to-day basis. If you go and check some of them out, one of the things that Cher and I, when we go and we're like, hey, we're going to go check out some other people's Hangout, we're like, this is so boring. There are so many boring Hangouts out there. They have no energy.
Boring.
Right? There's no laughter. There's no, it just seems like a stuffy boardroom that you're going into. And who wants to watch something like that for 5, 10, 15, maybe half an hour or an hour? So make sure that you are doing fun things. One of the things that Cher and I do on our show, Hacking Into Awesome, is when we have a guest, we like to play games. So we kind of do like an icebreaker game, and it kind of warms up the guest. There's some laughs. We get to see people's personality, and I think it allows us to have a really entertaining discussion with whatever we're talking about. So one of the things you want to make sure is use that rundown, plan accordingly in order to have something that's entertaining. No one wants to watch boring office meetings, stuff like that. Okay, so let's move into tip number 7, which is avoid talking over the other guest panelist.
Honestly, this is rude. It's hard to not do that, but it's rude.
Is it?
And yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
You see what happens? You can't even follow the conversation anymore because there's 2 voices going on.
Crazy.
So yes, and it's also a serious audio killer. So just wait for the natural pause and then slip in to steer the conversation. But at the same time, if you have a problem with one of your guests, you may have to use our next tip, which is use the eject button. You may have to boot them if it's necessary.
That is true. Fortunately, that's not something that we have ever experienced, but we are prepared. Cher, definitely, as we said, she controls our master control, and in the event that someone's not being respectful, is not really following the guidelines of our show, then we will not waste any time and eject them from our show. At the end of the day, we want our show to be a pleasant experience for our guests, as well as anyone who's watching us, and of course, ourselves. So I definitely advise, if anyone is kind of stepping out of line, making, inappropriate comments, don't be afraid to use the eject button and get those people off your broadcast.
See this finger? This is all about my trigger-happy finger. I'm ready. So don't come on my show and be rude, because I will eject you.
All right, now let's get into tip number 9, which is a biggie, and Cher knows all about this, which is promote your Hangout on air socially.
For sure. And I mean, the Hangout itself is a highly interactive and social experience. So you want to make sure that you're promoting your show wherever you have an active and engaged audience, as well as where the audience that would be interested in the subject matter of your Hangout would actually care about and where they hang out. You want to go to them and promote it to them. We often will go find people who have circled one of our guests and go circle them and invite them, because that's the way that you grow your audience and your reach, as well as following other people on Twitter and inviting them because they want to find out, or they may want to know about your Hangout and they would have never known otherwise. And of course, social gives you that huge reach to do that and build the relationships. But also, you want to make sure not only you're promoting it before your show, you're doing it during your show. So perhaps you have somebody else who is working your Twitter or your Facebook or wherever you're actively engaged with your audience. So we have our associate producer, Adriel, who always is on Twitter tweeting back with our audiences, sending us questions so that we can ask our guests. So that's something that you want to do. And of course, don't forget, when the show is over, the promotion does not stop. You've got to share it out, because some people didn't see your show. Most people don't see your show live. So that's why you have to spend the time in your social networks sharing it out that way. And of course, you want to make sure that you have clear social calls to action. So, for example, in YouTube, we're always asking people to like, comment, and subscribe to the show. You want to do the same thing. And for our last tip, I'm going to leave this with you.
Cher, I want to just one other thing is, of course, as the host, make sure you share the YouTube link to your guest so that they share it with their social networks, and that the people that follow them that you might have not been able to connect with can actually see the broadcast as well. So that's really important after the show as well.
Huge. That's huge. I'm glad you brought that up, because that's another way to actually increase your reach, because you're leveraging their audience. So you definitely want to do that. And that leads us again to one more final tip. And Lori, I'll let you take this away.
Oh, for sure. You know what? The first time that Cher and I wanted to do this Hangout on Air thing, I was so nervous. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be broadcast in front of all these people, and I hope I don't mess up. And I still mess up. But I hope that, as you will see if you watch our show, you'll see the evolution of my real personality really come out. And that's one of the things that you have to just do if you're a host. Let your personality naturally shine. Don't get nervous. Enjoy this. It's a great, fun experience. And you know what? Everyone else is taken. Just be you.
And that's all it takes to be an awesome Hangout on Air host. So make sure you check out our other tutorials, because we've given you a ton of tips and advice that you can use to make your Hangouts awesome. As well, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel, because we have a lot more where that came from. Thanks so much for joining us, and check out the other vids.